Hi, cuties. So, enlisted is making me further regret my decision. They're doing in the middle of the battle pass, a whopping third of the way through. But yeah, this other event seems pretty cool. There's the old Beretta, which eat one of these probably pretty. Guessing I'm. Yup. So here we go. We're gonna do it. Try to at least. None of these thinking things. Dailies today suck, frankly. They're all at odds with. Oh god, yeah, they're all at odds. Stuff. So I guess I'm just gonna be trying to use a bolt. Just hope the other stuff just happens. um, that in mind. Oh, using a bolt already. Thought for one I wasn't using. Guess I'm stupid. I could have sworn I did. Oh, and look at that, a single gold. Guess let's. That's it. All right. Okay. And then for what we're listening, instead of my usual Nate Hagen stuff, which does seem cool. There's a new video out that I definitely checking out. This one popped up and the interesting.
Video is about.
Well, I guess I'll yap some more. I think non-human kind, interesting subject. Doing.
Biosemiotics.
Check it out and start sniping. Oh, also look at this. Another Gary Steve. Ding title. Hell yeah, dog. Yeah, some. All right.
Way to understand non-human
Oh,
consciousness
and
in
this too.
nature.
Oh my god.
What you saw was the elephants on the coastal zones. They
And
broke
this too.
free
Oh my
from their
god.
shackles, and they headed for the hills,
Ooh.
and the people followed them
Before the tsunami, this is of course, yeah.
hours before the tsunami.
Oh, that's
no
awesome too.
human
Oh.
and none of our artifacts of measurement knew what was going on, but they knew.
Okay.
Our mind is in the world. Our mind is emergent through the relations we have with all the other beings and all the other strands. Every organism sees a different part of reality.
Yeah, has a different dashboard.
Yeah. And insofar as we can become aware of any other organism, we are sharing some sort of umwelt. There's some overlap. You're killing ways of seeing the world, ways of being in the world. You know, when we destroy olive trees that have been around for 1,000 years, we don't know what relations those olive trees were holding up on an ecological level, but also on a semiotic one. When we are scrolling through our black mirrors, you know, looking for that dopamine release, what we're actually looking is to be nestled in the branches or the roots of a tree. In Japan, they have Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, where doctors prescribe for various illnesses, go be in a forest, lie down, breathe, be there for an hour, feel all your emotions.
We need to feel again, you said.
That's the only way that we will survive.
Pretty cool.
Very warm welcome at the Essentia Foundation's YouTube channel. I'm sitting down here with Dr. Yogi Handlin. Yogi, very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Hans.
Great that you are here, and what I found so nice is that you live so nearby, because I found out that you live in Zutphen, and Zutphen which is only like 20 kilometers, so that's awesome.
Yeah, I took the train. It took me like 10 minutes.
Perfect. So it's great that you are here. You are an environmental philosopher, assistant professor at the Erasmus School of Philosophy in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and you've worked as a public health scientist at the University of California for 20 years. And, very important, you are editor-in-chief of the Journal of Biosemiotics. Now, what biosemiotic is, we will touch upon later in this conversation. But I have an opening question that definitely relates to it. We previously had a video with Federico Fagin, the physicist and inventor of the first CPU, who basically states that space-time, the world we see around us, is the universe talking to itself. It's a symbolic representation of consciousness in his theory. Thinking about biosemiotics, so the meaning-making of nature in nature, which you study, made me think and see a similarity with the thinking of Federico, which leads me to the opening question. Does nature speak to us in a language? And in a language that we, I think, in the West, definitely the last 200 years, don't fully hear and cannot understand anymore.
Well,
sorry for the long...
The short answer is yes. The inhalation of 50,000 microbes and the exhalation of 50,000 microbes every time.
Is this every time we breathe?
Yeah, it's just a...
It's amazing.
It's a gas exchange of countless microorganisms. Now, are those microorganisms affecting our thought?
Yeah, we both suck.
Our physiology?
Well, I
would say
suck
yes.
more.
They are impacting our
All right.
interface or dashboard of perception. Now, are they doing this in a way that directly is sort of homunculus style in our brain, in our pineal gland, typing away at a keyboard saying, okay, now we're programming him to say this? Absolutely not. But there is an influence, however subtle and however nuanced, that I think most of us are, including myself, on a day-to-day basis, unaware of. So when we talk about nature, there's typically a breakdown between the biotic, the abiotic, and the artificial, right? Sort of three different realms. And one way to look at this question of, is nature communicating with us?
Yikes. A good shot.
Is the question that you get in biophysics, right? By biophotons, like with light, for example. There is some sort of communication in photons hitting our eyes, photons hitting our skin. In a similar way, but different from how red light and blue light affects us when we're staring at a computer screen. Late at night, I have a red shift on my computer so that it doesn't keep me up. Plants respond in the exact same way to red and blue light. Blue light wakes them up, red light puts them to sleep. And so when we understand through a synesthetic lens communication, then we don't need to privilege one or another.
What's that synesthetic?
Synesthesia. Right? So synesthesia is like hearing a taste or feeling kinesthetically a sound, right? And I'm not just talking about bass waves in front of big speakers at a rave or anything. I'm talking about how the senses in many people and in many altered states of consciousness or peak experiences, the wiring of our different senses, our sense of smell, taste, sight, hearing, and feel, touch. In fact,
I could almost walk off.
They interweave with each other. So there are other ways in which we can understand reality than through a strict one-to-one sense channel relationship. And it's this
What did he say?
harmonization, feeling kinesthetically a sound, right? And I'm not just talking about bass waves in front of big speakers at a rave or anything. I'm talking about how the senses in many people and in many altered states of consciousness or peak experiences, the wiring of our different senses, our sense of smell, taste, sight, hearing, and feel, touch. In fact, they interleave with each other. So there are other ways in which we can understand reality than through a strict one-to-one sense channel relationship. And it's this harmonization of various sense data through various channels which impinge upon and supervene upon different ways in which we are impacted as embodied conscious beings, enables us to
can't really hear what he's saying.
is like hearing a taste or feeling kinesthetically a sound, right? And I'm not just talking about bass waves in front of big speakers at a rave or anything. I'm talking about how the senses in many people and in many altered states of consciousness or peak experiences, the wiring of our different senses, our sense of smell, taste, sight, hearing, and feel, touch, in fact, they interleaf with each other. So there are other ways in which we can understand reality than through a strict one-to-one sense channel relationship. And it's this harmonization of various sense data through various channels which impinge upon and supervene upon different ways in which we are impacted as embodied conscious beings, enables us to select wider.
What I hear you say, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that with our rational way of thinking, we narrow down the world with our abstractions, our models of the world, right? And are you saying that selecting wider would be open to much more data, also data that we sometimes cannot sort of conceive conceptually or scientifically yet, but that does influence us? For instance, you were correctly, you were mentioning microbes. We did on our channel, I made a documentary about sort of bacteria and was stunned about the gut microbiome axis, and even certain gut microbiomes might really influence people to eat more fat food because you have microbes that want that and somehow have found a way to tell your brains that to eat that fat food. So you're directly, they're like active agents influencing us. Are you saying with selecting wider, we should be open to all of that? And also, I'm curious about that question of agency, because when you say if nature gives us signs, who is sending those signs? Is there agency sort of in microbes, in plants, in nature around us?
So you're touching upon an ecological question. When I mention selecting wider, I'm definitely talking about the decentralization of agency. So for the last 500 years or so, with the Enlightenment, there was a certain strand of thought that became dominant, which led to this notion that only humans, and to be honest, historically, only a very small fraction of humans had reason, right? And this reason was very constrained. So it wasn't about praxis or practical reason. It was about a abstract sort of, I guess what Aristotle called nous. And that was seen as the only form of rationality that mattered.
This match sucks.
Am along the lines of Robert Sapolsky in his work, best known in Behave and Determined, where he talks about we, as humans, most of the time, Kant talks about autonomy, and then on the other side of the spectrum, we have automaticity. And Descartes and Bacon were saying these animals, these non-humans, and most humans, they're just purely automatic. And what neuroscience and cognitive science, especially 5EA, extended, embodied, inactive, ecological, and embedded, and affective cognitive science shows is that our mind is in the world. Our mind is emergent through the relations we have with all the other beings and all the other strands, both from the skin in and the skin out. And one of the really important things here that I sort of just want to get off my chest to begin with is the compartmentalization of thinking, okay, so if
Okay, I'm gonna hit the restroom real quick, and then I'll be right back. All right, we back at it again at Krispy Kreme. Boy, what a world! What a world! All right, biosemiotic. Keep reading about it. Pretty cool, dude. This is sick. Oh man. Oh, good stretch. Holy shit. Oh. Yeah. Okay. Actually. Okay. We're locking back in finally. Sorry. At least the delay was probably more entertaining than that.
Agency is decentered, then what makes us think that our unitary consciousness is ours or us, right? And would it be different if I didn't have a liver, or if you weren't here, or if the light were a different color, would I still be me in the same way? And if the answer in any such way is no, then there is a relational ontology, right? There's a relational sense of self. But on the other hand, we know that there is continuity, right?
Yeah.
So, if I get my arm chopped off, I'm still me in many respects. Now, I will also change in some respects.
But it would stress me in a way which would directly change me here in a sense.
Yeah.
And what I hear you say is, it makes me think of sort of going back, sort of we started with microbes and studying the world and the empiricism of, you're mentioning the empiricism of Francis Bacon, and he said stuff like that. Yeah, like, also I think we should burn everything that has to do with, like, if you cannot...
Actually, before I get started, I'm going to take another tiny teensy little break. 1 second. Oakley dokley. All right, we're really getting back into it. Also, I'm going to rewind that because I processed it. And it is really an interesting. Probably like 2/3 of this video I'm going to have to replay because just to process it more.
Centered, then what makes us think that our unitary consciousness is ours or us, right? And would it be different if I didn't have a liver, or if you weren't here, or if the light were a different color? Would I still be me in the same way? And if the answer in any such way is no,
11.
Then there is a relational
Zero.
ontology, right? There's a relational sense of self. But on the other hand, we know that there is continuity, right?
Yeah.
So, if I get my arm chopped off, I'm still me in many respects. Now, I will also change in some respects.
But it would stress me in a way which would directly change me here in a sense.
Yeah.
And what I hear you say is, it makes me think of sort of going back, sort of we started with microbes and studying the world and the empiricism of, you're mentioning the empiricism of Francis Bacon, and he said stuff like that. Yeah, like, also I think we should burn everything that has to do with, like, if you cannot prove it, that hardcore empiricism. And what I found interesting, I found out when making the documentary about bacteria that sort of at the same time that Descartes was in the Netherlands, by the way, writing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In Amsterdam Canals, he was writing that. And at the same time, we had Anthony van Leeuwenhoek studying bacteria for the first time through a microscope.
With his microscope.
And they both go very well. They go hand in hand because it was very functional to see those little blobs of order moving in front of his lens, to just see them as them or they or the other, and just studying and think that you can study it objectively, that it doesn't affect us. So that cut that made science possible in a sense. So if I'd ask you sort of the ontology, the metaphysics of scientism, right, that we see right now, that you think that you can sort of have this glass between you and the world, which functioned very well. Do you think that that is at the root of the problems we see right now? When you mention stuff, for instance, in your like a meta crisis or a pluri crisis, you call it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the meta crisis, which is a crisis of mental health, physical health, chronic disease, societal disease, and planetary disease, all brought upon by, you could say, unfounded assumptions of...
Man, this
you
guy's
could
saying
call
the
it
same shit I be
reductionism, you could
thinking.
call it a narrow vision of rationality, because I very much think that rationality is extremely important for solving this. But what we're taking to be valid scientific measurement is actually this recursive process that is not based on anything. So it's, you could say, in attempting to lay foundations for a theory of knowledge, it in fact is, a castle made of sand.
That's a pretty bold thing to say. Are you sort of like the whole... What part of science do you think does this, sort of?
Well, I would go back to the early 20th century, where you have Heisenberg and Bohr and these scientists realizing the influence and impact of the observer. Niels Bohr has this notion not of deflection, not of receiving something, but of diffraction, right? So that every it goes back to Goethe's color theory. So what is light? What is color to us? It's neither in the object itself nor in our eye. It's in the relation. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis about color in ancient
this is so
Greek
cool.
Perception says that it's not just a physiological change, it's also a cultural cognitive change. So that if you don't have the concept of the color blue, then the sea is wine red, the sky is gray.
All right, I don't know about that.
We are very much constrained by our cultural concepts for how we understand how the world works.
Yeah.
This notion that we live in a communicative order completely underpins biology. Biologists cannot get away from metaphors like signaling, communication, transcription, all these things which are process-based, they're relation-based, they're based on awareness in even molecules of other things. So there is this sense of, at the most fundamental level, an awareness of one's relations. Now in biosemiotics, we generally go down to the cell level as the sort of minimum model of communication. My colleague Jeremy Sherman talks about the sort of sequence of the sciences. You have, physics, which
This would be a great place to snipe from, man.
chemistry, which begets biology, which begets psychology and sociology.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then
That's
we get
the
all these
normal
other
pyramid of order.
15 minutes and a half. Yeah, I want to grab that. No! Damn, why do I suck so much? Damn! Yeah, they were sucking balls at the beginning. They have turned it around. Alright, let's get the bolts. We're gonna be a good place for that. Maybe. Oops.
We'll go. Affirmative.
I don't know if I'll be able to reach the roof.
Yes.
Oh, sweet. Alright. We're in business. Perhaps this is bad for health. Oh! Got to
Whatever, yeah.
press
So,
play on the video.
It's
Oh,
really
fuck, come
important
on.
not to apply to a more developed order like biology the rules of chemistry. And yet we have, you could say, this physics
What?
envy or physics centrism, which attempts to apply to the biological world a Lagrangian or a theory of everything, where it is somehow figure out a bull, when indeed there are emergent processes that cannot be predicted from physics alone. And this is a big problem for science, because we've been trying to, for hundreds of years, take the rules of Newton, take the rules of chemistry, and apply them to biology, to human behavior, right?
Yeah.
And so we're very good at this point of looking at the very small and the very large, and being quite accurate on a physics level.
Oh!
But we're
Motherfucker.
not very good at dealing with chemistry. And I deal with the chemical harms to all life with a lot of my work. I talk about chemical colonialism and the chemical Anthropocene. So we haven't quite.
Cool shit. Also, chemical colonialism. Check that out some. Oh, forgot.
quite understood how chemistry
Oh, fuck.
impacts biology, because we don't understand
I hate when
biology.
it makes you auto-spawn.
And we don't understand psychology and sociology, in part because we don't understand
Yeah.
biology and ecology.
I really like what I see when you talk about sort of it being relational. We did a couple videos sort of into the foundations of physics, where you really see sort of a shift towards relational quantum mechanics. So
These
basically
fuckwits.
embracing. Carlo Rovelli is very known for it, but there are all sorts of different flavors of this relational quantum mechanics. But it basically says that it's all about relations, and we cannot even
Where'd the
speak
gun go?
anymore
Oh, I
about
picked
sort
it
of,
up. What a fool.
facts in the world. Crazy stuff, and that shift is happening, I think, for the last 20 years. It's been sort of there from the beginning. I mean, you mentioned sort of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, but somehow in the 20th century, also quantum mechanics went to in sort of this shut up and calculate mode, right? And sort of denied that sort of ontological questionnaire. So we see it in physics, but how does it work? And we know a little bit how it works in physics, right? When that we have the measurement problem.
Bruh.
What's sort of the measurement problem in biology, and how to go about it? And I'm also want to hear you talk about participatory action research, sort of becoming one with your research subject or object. Subject, I should say, of course, sorry.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, even in physics, you see relativity playing a role. So this goes back to an old, Heraclitus versus Parmenides battle.
I didn't see
the original schism, you could say. And here you have Smolin at the Perimeter Institute,
Yep.
who's talking about the laws of physics change over time, right? Maybe just a little bit here and there from our observed empirical analysis. But if
This is bad,
there
man.
are changes to these constants,
Our team's pretty good, and we're
then
just
that
getting
means
hyped.
that we're living in a processual
like
universe.
rally point
right?
wise.
Dennis Noble, also in biology, is talking
Oh,
about
shit.
biological relativism.
Damn it.
And this notion that we have the rules of biology.
Oh, come on,
changing.
bruh.
And that's why I am firmly in the camp of
What are we
evolutionary,
doing?
the evolutionary synthesis
Alright.
in biology, the extended evolutionary synthesis and ecological evolutionary developmental biology. These fields that over the last 40 years have
Oh, man.
developed, showing the importance of the hollow beyond, the importance of epigenetics, the importance of group selection, even interspecies selection, rather than selecting just on the basis of the individual. We want to understand how other organisms communicate in their natural habitat, which the field of ethology aims to do. We need to go and see how they do that. So in Brazil,
Damn,
there's
we
these
are getting
dolphins that for
fucked.
40 years, maybe 50 by now, they have fished with local Brazilian fishermen. The dolphins will corral when they see the fishermen coming out for, what's it been? Early morning at dawn, they the dolphins will see the fishermen coming with their nets and will corral the fish to
Seriously?
the fishermen in Brazil. Yes, this is super well documented over
Yeah.
decades. And when the fish try to evade the dolphins, they get caught in the nets, and so
And
the,
what's
the
the-
fishermen get a lot
yeah,
more, and
what's
the
the key?
dolphins
Yeah.
also get more.
Of
And you
course,
see
yeah.
that not all the dolphins in that area participate. There's some pods that do, some pods that don't, and so it is a choice, and it is a relationship that is multi-generational, both with the human Brazilian fishermen and with the dolphins. And so you see these new ways of symbiosis evolving all around the world. Interspecies relationships. This is actually what I wrote my PhD on. My dissertation's on interspecies discourse ethics, interspecies communication. And, there's another example, Barbara Smuts, a ethologist, who she was following a group of primates along the river, and at one spot they just sat down for half an hour. They were silent and still, and just listening. They weren't
Yeah,
really,
stand up. What the
it was
hell?
like they were meditating. And she would have never caught that if she was trying to get them to do something. No, she had spent months earning their trust, being accepted into their troop,
Oh.
and then she got to have this magic
Oh
moment
shit! I didn't know you could walk up here.
with them.
That's
And
cool.
she saw this as the culmination of understanding a different side of these primates than anybody else had ever, a behavior that had never been observed before. And this required
Oh, those break. Okay.
deep humility.
That is why I've never seen
So
anyone
a
do
sense
that.
of being humble in the face of a science system that you don't understand. Deep listening, so finding interspecies forms.
And when I
Can
hear
this
you
be
speak,
semi-auto?
Yogi, it
Oh,
also
it can
sort
be
of makes me
auto
think that
slow.
we're somehow
That's even
trapped in these hierarchies in all of our thinking, but especially when it comes to consciousness. And I think nice to go a bit
This guy kicks ass.
deeper into biosemiotics and touching upon the notion of
Damn.
Umwelt, which is an important one in biosemiotics, and the notion that everyone we cannot perceive Earth reality directly as it is, right? So, but maybe
Fuck.
first quick question, so just for the lay audience, what exactly
Fuck,
is
are you kidding?
biosemiotics?
Great. All right. So semiotics is the understanding there are different science systems that we all use, and it's not reductive to writing or language, but also our gestures, right? Our looks, facial expressions, and biosemiotics
Okay.
builds upon this and says, yes, okay, so the work of Charles Sanders Peirce, which we use his triadic model. So Saussure, Ferdinand Saussure is the other semiotician. This is sort of like the history of semiotics. Okay. You have two, the French and the American.
Okay,
And so the French...
this is 19th century when we talk when it
Yeah,
came up.
this is 19th, 20th century, like
Mhm.
fin de siècle. Very rich time for science. And so what you have is, in
Oh, damn it.
Saussure's model, you have sort of this notion of coding and decoding. So it's a dualistic model.
Oh.
Charles Sanders Peirce.
I thought I was
he
trying to
was
throw
a
it at the wall
polymath,
so it would fall down.
Very good friend of William James, and he's the progenitor, actually, of the pragmatist movement of philosophy. So he's the father of pragmatism as well as being the father of semiotics. And so his
Yeah, I should
triadic
have just
model
came over here with
shows
those
that
machine guns.
you have
That would have been a lot smarter.
the interpreter, that's us. You
That was
have
way
the
too late.
object, which is there in the world, and then you have our representation of it. Now, we can't really get to the object itself. And this is the question of Umwelt and Umgebung, which biosemiotics takes up from the
Really out of
Estonian,
ammo.
German, or Prussian father of theoretical biology, Jakob von Uexküll. And Uexküll has this notion of the Umgebung, which he gets from Kant, as the absolute reality. Now he's in
the noumenal world, the noumena.
Now he's a neo-Kantian, but he's not exactly a Kantian. And because he does believe that noumenal world is not just
I think I can get down.
is not at the expense of or exclusive of materiality. It far extends beyond materiality, but he doesn't see a dualism there, right? So the Umwelt, on the other hand, is our dashboard consciousness.
Yeah.
Right. This is the interface theory of perception that Donald Hoffman and others have developed. And my colleague
Holy shit.
and I,
All right.
Brian
Let's just TNT
Kumalo,
them.
we wrote a paper about Hoffman's work and biosemiotics.
Yeah.
And what we showed is that there are many similarities because we both use this Huxleyan model of Umgebung, absolute reality.
I wish I had noticed that sooner. Son of a bitch.
Umwelt, which is our species-specific, sensory constrained understanding of what exists.
Yeah.
And that every organism sees a different part of reality.
Yeah. As a different dashboard.
Yeah. And insofar as we can become aware of any other organism, either incarnate, that I mean in the material world, or in the imaginal worlds, insofar as we can become aware of them at all, that means that we are sharing some sort of Umwelt. There's some overlap.
Yeah.
And so the question is a question of more or less, rather than of all or nothing.
That's super interesting, because when you say overlap, what triggers me, I mean that this is like magic realism. You've also written a paper about
Object-oriented ontology.
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
but also sort of on sort of magic realist notion that sort of plants may have sort of drive us in a certain direction.
Yes.
But it's sort of, that is magical thinking in a sense. But when you say those Umwelts overlap, so
Oh gosh.
let's say a plant
Got it
has
too
an
deep.
Umwelt. It has a sort of a notion of reality that we don't have access to.
Fuck.
And
These guys
then
have
an
better
animal
gear.
interacts with that plant. Their Umwelts overlap in a way that we still don't have access to, but we overlap with the animal. Is there sort of a knowledge network then possible that we can get knowledge of other Umwelts through interaction with animals, get information
Absolutely.
for plants? So is that sort of the part of this biosemiotic way of thinking?
Absolutely. And so we categorize this under applied biosemiotics, but you can absolutely see the example of Sri Lanka and the 2004 tsunamis in Southeast Asia, killing over 100,000 people, more. And what you saw was the elephants on the coastal zones.
It's still loud as shit.
They broke free from their shackles, and they headed for the hills, and the people followed them.
Before the tsunami, this is, of course, yeah.
Hours before the tsunami, and it saved tens of thousands of people's lives.
Wow.
Following the elephants. None of our seismographs, none of our earthquake monitors were able to detect that what was coming. Nobody knew. No human, and none of our artifacts of measurement based on the recursive human perceptions knew what was going on, but they knew. And by following them, it saved tens of thousands of lives. And there are countless
Do we now
examples
understand
like this.
how, or still not how they sort of sense
We don't
that?
understand all the mechanisms. It could be air pressure changes, but here's the T. What's going on
Here's
is
the T.
much more complex than we can compute. Probably more complex than AI can compute. And that is really hard for us to accept. It's really hard because we want to be masters of the universe. We want to think
Here,
that
one
our
sec
science
again. I'm gonna
is
make a stupid joke. On a VM. Okay, finally locking back in. This whole stream is just gonna be me pausing this stuff and also rewind. Alright. That was an okay match though. It could have been a lot better. You fucked up, bro. Okay, last boost will probably be the last match. Well, no, it won't. I would. Pretty easy today, so I figure I might. Oh. May 22nd to the 28th? Only 3 phases. Okay. Alright, let's do it. We gotta do what now? What's happening now? 30 bolts. I'm sure the other ones will happen now. Alright, we'll keep on trying to do the bolts. Also, I remembered now what I was trying to do. Swap the guy. Oh. He's joking. Damn. No, that dang. Fuckers. Will be a while. Alright. So we're going for the bolts. How did the game start paused? Okay. This is probably BR5 if I had to guess. Like, this is going annoying match. Alright, let's keep listening.
Unparalleled the T.
The T.
What's going on is much more complex than we can compute. Probably more complex than AI can compute. And that is really hard for us to accept. It's really hard because we want to be masters of the universe. We want to think that our science is, unparalleled, and it is the sine qua non. We want to think that our machines are creating the Deus ex machina.
Yeah.
And really, what it all boils down to is we want to feel safe, and we want to feel that we actually know the world enough to find our place in it. And from a colonial mentality, the only way we know how to do that is to make the world in our image, right? Just like we've made God in our image, most cultures at least. And so there's this recursivity to the human, or the sort of atrophied notion of what humans can be.
And then, sorry to interrupt, but what a notion in your work, what really struck with me was sort of the word semiocide. So that's the killing of signs, killing of symbols. So is sort of the way we treat nature.
Where the shit are they at?
Species going extinct. We are also killing new makers that would have told us something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this old Sean Connery film called Medicine Man, right? He goes to the jungle. He thinks he finds the cure for cancer. It's actually in the ants that are in the sugar that he's using for the assays, and it's burning down. And so we just burn down the Amazon rainforest, to, I don't know, graze cattle for McDonald's or whatever. And these ants had the cure to cancer in them, and he thought it was the wrong thing. He thought it was a different variable, right? He didn't even know that the ants were in the sugar, which were actually doing the work. And every genocide is semiocide. You're killing languages, you're killing ways of seeing the
Dude,
world, ways of
this
being in the
dude
world.
is
You know,
on the
When
money.
we destroy olive trees that have been around for 1,000 years, we don't know what relations those olive trees were holding up
I
on
love
an
this talk.
ecological level, but also on a semiotic one.
Yeah.
Every ecocide
come on.
is a semiocide. When we talk about smaller, more local, intimate versions of this, when we take our old folks
Damn
and we
it.
put them in old folks' homes, you know,
All right.
instead of being with family, being in their home that they grew up in, or had
That's
to
the first time
smell
I've seen the Jets.
familiarity, right? The extended cues in their environment which allow them to navigate as their senses start to erode. Certain senses, like smell, might be able to guide them. But when you put them in a completely new habitat, that's a form of semiocide. That's a form of semiocide. And there are huge scientific losses. Now, I don't think that that is the ethical reason for not doing these things. I think that that's the instrumental reason for not doing these things. But I think the ethical reason for not displacing people and beings and climate change is semiocide. We have this question of assisted migration. You know, corals are bleaching because it gets too warm. When we disrupt these much slower processes and speed them up thousands of times more than their background level of sort of migration.
Like a fucking
would
Scooby-Doo
work.
episode,
Because I
bro.
think of all reality as an inhalation and an exhalation. And all these rhythms, all these
Ooh, is that
cycles,
the
all these
Brahma?
processes have
No,
their
that's just
own
regular PB.
temporality, all their own rhythms that are intersecting and interlocking.
Oh my
but
gosh.
when we speed some of them up, it throws off all of them. We know for a fact that when we heat up the ambient temperature of a country,
And
that
even
it makes
be
the
able to
people
make
in
a
their home
damn rally.
that's the form of semiocide. When we, cut down a forest where, the Celts were praying in and the Druids had their rituals with, we are destroying an entire cycle between the trees and those people. So even if none of the actual human beings died, their culture is dead in a very real way.
Yeah.
It's a form of semiocide. And
Oh,
you see this actually used in warfare all the time. In India, there's these movements of people who wrap themselves around trees that were going to be cut. And it's been happening for like 100+ years, where people will protect trees from logging because of their relationships with the trees and their ontology. They realize, we might have forgotten it, but they haven't. Their ontology is bound up, their destiny, their fate, and suffering
Bruh.
and joy is bound up with the continuation of their habitat and ecology. Their web of relations makes them who they are.
Bruh, 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 bruh.
It touches me because I only
The
recently
Condors is good.
feel more connected with nature, and to be quite honest, it has been sort of the strongest connection with nature came through psychedelic experiences I've had, and thinking about it from Essentia Foundation's perspective, a science perspective, and I think we met even on the international conference on psychedelic research, right? That's
Yeah.
where we met initially. I still remember interviewing Jussi Jilka, and I titled our interview and his sort of way of thinking as sort of model collapse, namely the fact that psychedelic substances in a certain way affecting our, what's it called? The
Default mode network.
Exactly, sorry, the default mode network breaks down our models of the world. So sort of our whole sort of Umwelt mechanism, or Donald Hoffman's dashboard, sort of the dashboard making, it somehow breaks it down, opening us up. At least that was my take on it, opening us up more to different Umwelts. And it has been like a deeply personal experience of mine on these substances, and then walking in nature versus sort of like in a normal waking consciousness. What are your thoughts here, and how does it relate to your concept of ecodelia and ecodelics?
Ecodelics, my preferred way of thinking about psychedelics is this notion that psychedelics are not mind manifesting, but they're ecology manifesting in this sort of
Whoa, that's an interesting.
5EA cog psi notion of what our consciousness is made out of. and
Sorry,
where it
5E,
exists.
Yogi?
The extended, embedded, embodied, inactive, ecological, and affective cognition that which is our birthright, which isn't in here.
Ow.
It's not a homunculus, driving a tractor called a human body. It's, we're not just a meat suit, but we also are not the owners of our actions, as Robert Sapolsky and others talk about. We are the result of vectors, and all the vectors coming together in their various directions lead to the result of us being, thinking, feeling who, what we are. So this notion of ecodelia with trees and walking in forests, what we're talking about here is a more open aperture, being able to surrender and feel all the weight that we've been carrying of performing humanness, performing some notion of the rational actor, which doesn't allow us to tap into other sensory channels which are always already there, operating with us, but which the default mode network has been fending off at all costs.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I'll just bring it in, and it might sound woo, but I mean, scientifically, it's just a phenomenal experience I've had. So just an N is one experience I've had is that with a very specific tree in a forest that I very often visit, I always found the tree beautiful, but it was on sort of a walk in nature with a small amount of psychedelic substances that are, I mean, we live in that sense in a great country, by the way. It's good to mention that in the Netherlands, it's completely legal here, some of these substances.
Freedom of consciousness.
Man.
Yeah, in a sense it is. And it was only on these substances that I could connect on, I felt a deeper connection with a specific tree, which I really felt as love. And coming down, so to speak, immediately the judging mind, the default mode network, starts being active again. Okay, that was just the psychedelics that worked. And you create this story again of sort of feeling a deep, intimate love for a specific tree is just sort of a psychedelic effect and not something more profound. And my question to you is also thinking about psychedelic
Dude, we suck. What the hell?
philosophy. I mean, Aldous Huxley made this distinction between seeing the psychedelic experience as a window into a deeper realm of truth, of reality, or seeing it as a mirror, just mirrors back. And I see sort of this, I wouldn't say clash, but it's a debate also at the ICPR, at the Conference of Psychedelic Research, between researchers who are much more on the mirror aspect, safely saying it's just what's already there and it shows it to you. So me feeling that tree is just something that has to do with my own psychology, and now it's like stronger. And that other mirror, sort of the window on a deeper realm. I myself am much more towards the window, so interpretation. What are your thoughts here?
So we humans are obsessed with being loved by the animate world because we have lost that animacy with our.
What are your thoughts here?
So we humans are obsessed with being loved by the animate world, by the more than human world, because we have lost that animacy with ourselves. We no longer hallucinate gods all the time, like maybe we did 8,000 years ago for our corpus callosum, connecting our left and right hemispheres of our brain, got smaller, right? And according to Ian McGilchrist, the left hemisphere of knowing all the time, being right, dominating, and already having it all figured out, started to, invert the roles. Instead of being the emissary, it became the master, and it gets very sick in that way, and ultimately sees everything just as a mirror. It's a hall of mirrors.
Yeah.
A labyrinth that you can't get out of. The Greeks knew about this. If you go back to, the Minotaur and Icarus and Daedalus and all these stories about these labyrinths, they're labyrinths of the mind. And these labyrinths of the mind, which shackle us to certain perceptions, are based on things that we do not value. Fear, resentment, smallness, cowardliness. These are I don't think any culture worth its salt would say that these are things that we want to inculcate into our children. And at the same time, you know, when we say, oh, yeah, love is, or the love for the tree, maybe it's not a mirror, but maybe it's also not a mirror.
Damn.
Maybe it's a relation. Now, I'm not saying
Alright.
that if you're taking enough psychedelics, you couldn't be staring at a brick wall and also have the same experience. But I personally, in my life, understand that ritual ceremony with a more than human, alive world in which we're snuggled, in which we feel comfortable, in which we feel at home, allows us not just to project, and also not just to receive, but to connect. And it's this connection in the middle, the relation, which exists neither in our eye nor in the light, but is made through the intention, also the commitment that comes with that. Because I'm sure, you know, God forbid,
What a
if
world.
somebody wanted to cut down that tree and you knew about it beforehand, you would try to protect that tree.
When you just said that example of people protecting a tree, that's what triggered me to bring up this story, because I thought if that would happen to that tree, I'd jump on my bike right now,
Yeah.
go to that tree, and I'll lay in front of it and
And
bring
to
my
me,
kids.
that is love, and that is an emotion that leads to action. If emotions lead to action, they're, I would say, genuine.
That's pretty cool.
Dialogical experiences and connections. If it doesn't lead to action, then I would say it might just be crocodile tears. It might just be
42, man. These are pretty cool, man. This is a cool episode, man. I'm actually way surprised at how nice it is. What I was expecting. It's like really cool. Ooh, right. Damn, we can't re-roll shit. That game was so bad I didn't even get the bolts. Damn, yeah, I still need 20 bolts. Ugh. What a world. 2 MGs. Bruh. Yeah, that was a horrible match. Alright, well, at least getting the 6 matches will be, because we're gonna already be through them. Yeah, if I was in a good game, like 2 of these could have been done in. That's crazy. It's taken 3 in there. Anyway,
a projection
I'm gonna have
or
to
a
step
desire
away again.
that you then
The restroom,
fantasize
in
about.
fact, I
But
wish
if it
I
leads
had.
to action, there's something there where there's been an exchange.
Here, maybe this will be my AFK, one of my AFK games. Because I have got to hit the restroom. Now that it's feeling fine. Literally seconds ago. Alright. We're just gonna build that rally. Before any fine spot to right. Build my own bench. In fact, I would love to snipe right here. Gosh dang it. But we will answer the call of nature. Be right back. cool. I haven't been kicked yet. The AFKing is going swimmingly. Oh, and I'm balls deep past the spawn. That's not good. Sucks though, because for real, that first point is my favorite one to defend. Oh, wait, I'm tripping. I wasn't past the spawn. I'm fine. Oh! Oh, fuck! I didn't realize! Ooh, I was trying to put it right here. Unfortunately, it didn't quite make it. What the hell's going on in here? We're done fortified the whole John up. Come on. Oh shit. Man.
Okay, you have to hold that point. Yes, sir.
I just saw somebody moving. Oh my god. He's in a whoa! Good grief! I just should not even try, huh?
That's more like it.
Wait for them. I guess I can resume the video.
And of course, we don't have to put it in, you know, our
Come on.
scaffolding of known scientific mechanisms, but we also can be very clear that there's a ton of research on nature connectedness, as I'm sure you know,
Yeah.
from the psychedelic world, which they talk about,
Yeah.
which shows that if you take a walk in a forest, if you are able to do that, you know, in Japan they have Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, where doctors prescribe for various illnesses, go be in a forest, lie down, breathe, be there for an hour, feel all your emotions. And I think that that is as healing for those forests as it is for the patients.
That's interesting. You think it affects nature if we do it?
How could it not? Our fear of feeling our own grief, our own solastalgia, as Glenn Albrecht calls it, our fear of actually feeling the emotions which come with the degradation of our habitat, those lack of expression of feelings are keeping us in ecocide. They're keeping us in this static pattern.
Yeah.
Right? We need to throw some chaos
Yeah.
at it, and that's what psychedelics are really good at. They're non-localized amplifiers, right? I think that's Groff's definition.
I don't know. It sounds like a very cool definition.
They're
yeah.
non-specific amplifiers.
Yeah.
So if you are in nature, you are going to be more open to that.
Yeah.
And I think that psychedelics are always, you know, I don't want to say only, but when
what
we're
the
not
fuck? Why are we
using them
dropping
in
back
nature,
here?
we're
Come
not
on now,
fulfilling
what
their
the
full
fuck?
purpose. And then we're also short-circuiting ourselves
the
back
hell?
into that hall of mirrors. We're understanding those imaginal
fuck,
realms as a mirror or as a window rather than a relation. And that's why, for example, if
Where's
you're
my boys?
using psychedelics in the base, you know, say DMT in a basement, and
we just
you
got
happen
fucked up
to
like that.
have a you know, a white supremacist ideology, it's just going to reflect back to you that white supremacist ideology because you're not bouncing it off anything else. There's no connection.
But
You're
let me
just
run that back.
fantasizing and about whatever is there to begin with. So
Yeah.
that's why it's a non-specific amplifier. But if you're using psychedelics in the base, you know, say DMT in a basement, and you happen to have a you know, a white supremacist ideology, it's just going to reflect back to you that white supremacist, Groff's definition.
I don't know. It sounds like a very cool
They're
definition.
non-specific amplifiers.
Yeah.
So
Ooh,
if
roll
you are in
badness.
nature,
Oh,
you are
another
going
one.
to be more open to that.
Yeah.
And I think that psychedelics
Oh my
are
gosh.
always and I don't want to say only, but when we're not using them in nature, we're not fulfilling their full purpose, and we're also short-circuiting ourselves back into that hall of mirrors. We're understanding those imaginal realms as a mirror or as a window, and that's why, for example, if you're using psychedelics in the base, say DMT in a basement, and you happen to have a white supremacist ideology, it's just going to reflect back to you that white supremacist ideology, because you're not bouncing it off anything else.
Yeah.
There's no connection. You're just fantasizing and about whatever is there to begin with. So that's why it's a non-specific amplifier. But these substances have always been used in community, in nature, historically. And they've been used to heal, it's not about healing individuals, it's about healing the relationship between the human community and the more than human world. And that is what psychedelics are there for. And when we heal that relationship, we may unlock whole nother stages and levels of what psychedelics can offer us. And we also might be able to unlock that without the psychedelics at all. Not that I, would ever want to forego that possibility, but I do think that we can live in an ecodelic world and state, because all of this, we're talking about states, mind states, states of a body of being, right, of connection. And when we're in these states, it doesn't matter how we got there, as long as we're listening and vulnerable and open and surrendering to that part of ourself that's a Nazi, killing our inner Nazi, which is the default mode network, which is restraining us from acknowledging the synesthesia, all the feelings they're constantly washing over us.
Yeah.
We need to let those spirits go instead of holding on to them and letting them make us into a meat puppet, which I would say most of us do most of the time, right? But if we want a little bit of free will, we need to let go of our ideologies. We need to let go of our notion that we're right. And we need to feel more the more than human world, the animate world, which is our birthright for 98% of our existence. We saw in every tree, in every cloud, in every body of water, we saw the gods. We saw the mystery. We saw the part of ourself that, in Greece, they called it the daemon, that's on your shoulder that everybody else can see. But the moment you turn to look at it, it goes somewhere else. You can never see your own sort of spirit, right? And when we can see through other species' eyes ourselves, so much of our insecurity in the 21st century as human beings goes away. When we are scrolling through our black mirrors, looking for that dopamine release, which of course is super hyper reductionist. Let's select lighter. What we're actually craving is to be nestled in the branches or the roots of a tree. We're craving to be seen by the more than human world through the eyes of an other that we cannot understand, and to feel seen and to feel love and to see beauty. We're looking for beauty. We're all beautiful. That's what nature and creation and the imaginary realms are. The possibility for that. But the more we are afraid of that, the more we create ugliness, the more we create pollution, the more we create ecocide, genocide, semiocide, and the more impoverished we get on a level of significance and meaning.
So much depth here. The critical part of me, though, applying to
that back too.
So much depth here.
We're all beauty junkies, and that's what nature and creation and the imaginal realms are. The possibility for that. But the more we are afraid of that, the more we create ugliness, the more we create pollution, the more we create ecocide, genocide, semiocide, and the more impoverished we get on a level of significance and meaning.
So much depth here. The critical part of me, though, applying to me in nature and what I just shared with you, is that I do sometimes feel a sort of disconnect with the suffering in the world. I happen to live in a sort of a rich country. I have a nice home closely to nice nature in the Netherlands. This is great, sitting down with you, having conversations like these. There's a lot of suffering in the world, and I sometimes shut myself off from it. And then I feel that voice that says sort of, this is spiritual bypassing. Also in my work for Essentia, thinking about analytic idealism, and I feel that sort of risk, and I'm just sort of openly exploring that for myself. What are your reflections there on sort of that notion of spiritual bypassing and all what you just said?
Well, I feel you on that because I hope that every single human being alive in a position of privilege, like we are, feels that schizophrenia between a world which we sort of LARP this learned helplessness of like, oh no, my government or these corporations are doing all this horrible stuff all the way around the world, and these global commodity chains have been set up that just like export suffering everywhere, and we feel helpless, so we just go back to our job, we go back to our family, our little garden. And on the one hand,
and we do have psychedelics once a month.
Yeah, sure.
That's
yeah,
often
go to church, right? Do our dancing.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I would say that's like the exhale or the inhale, right? Depending on where you're at with it. We have to be able to live our lives and have the normalcy of believing that we're contributing to something greater, even if it doesn't look and feel like that right now. And hopefully we are, right? Because I don't think that that's empty. I don't think that that's empty. And I really want everybody to feel that whatever they're doing, however small or local or, it is, that
What the hell?
there is also this fierceness, this sense of resolve that I'm not just going to be
You fucking bugged me with the shovel.
Opting out, escapist, right?
That's
like Douglas Rushkoff, writes about in Survival of the Richest, where you have all these half-baked ideas from misled billionaires who think that they'll be able to escape our common destiny.
Yeah.
Right? By
Dude, there he goes again. Dude, this dude is absolutely split.
Or their bunker. And all of this is bullshit, I teach my students about this, and I think very young children understand that there is no escaping our shared planetary destiny, and that this is very serious, and that we have to do something about it. Bruno Latour has written extensively on this.
You also write like suffering is non-optional. I wrote in one of your papers. Like,
yeah, but you have to convert the suffering into beauty. So to not feel the suffering is creating more suffering. And so when we try to spiritually bypass and try to, plug our ears, our, eyes and our mouth, and don't take our autonomy, our God-given sovereignty in the world as agents of change, agents of upholding beauty, truth, and goodness, which I absolutely believe in as one, just as Socrates did. When we neglect that responsibility, then we become what? Who are we? How can we...
Damn! Yo, this is the best talk I have heard in a minute. Referencing the Socrates stuff and how all that stuff's the same. Yo! Crazy, dog. Oh, this still. Alright, I'm just gonna run that back again. I'll just say like around. All right, so we are just barely there. Super annoying, honestly. But we'll do it. Let me go check Vegas World real quick while we're doing. Thought I had a box. Oh boy, party passes. Okay. Oh, cool. We get to do Moscow. Ah, that's fun. Bet if we did Moscow first, we would have all them damn dailies out right away. Miss Moscow, man. It never comes. Alright. And this is a great one. Oh.
Получай!
Fuck right there.
Защищаем эту точку! Нам нужно перегруппироваться! Пощады!
Shit. Stay out there.
Умрите, ублюдки!
Like being over. I'll resume the talking. Just I don't want to miss any valuable time. Oftentimes, very start is such an indicator of how the rest of the map goes.
Мы должны удержать эту...
Oh!
Есть!
Oh, damn. Oh. Jeez. Yeah, that was cool. Alright. Back to the video.
To spiritually bypass and try to, plug our ears, our, eyes in our mouth, and don't take our autonomy, our God-given sovereignty in the world as agents of change, agents of upholding beauty, truth, and goodness, which I absolutely believe in as one,
What the hell?
just as Socrates did. When we neglect that responsibility, and we become what? Who are we? How can we have pride in ourselves? How can we show up for our children, our family, our community, even our gardens, right? So there is this inhale, exhale. We, in addition to have living our small little lives, intellectual, white-collar lives, whatever it is, which I protest less in the streets now than I did when I was 20. Do I feel like I'm getting stopped? No. But that's also because I'm very active in organizing with others. Because the data is clear. By ourselves, we cannot affect government decisions. Because it's all about government and governance. We ought to know all of our neighbors, in theory, and be able to say, no, we don't want this liquor store on our corner. Absolutely not. We don't need another one of those. Go away. No, we don't want you selling cigarettes to our kids. Go away. Exerting our no. But we've become flabby. We no longer take strong stands and know how to be successful. We don't know how to coalition build. We infight amongst each other, saying, "Oh, well, you don't have the same politics as me," or you also like these other things that are distasteful. So I'm not going to coalition build with you. This is stupid, ineffective, and it's nonsense.
Yeah.
So I see it as the two sides. It's like seasons, right? We have seasons in our lives where we organize with others to uphold the very fabric of our reality. Because if we just do nothing and pretend that doing our work is enough in a time of
And
emergency,
we're always
I would say
subject to the rich.
unequivocally, with the meta crisis, we are in a state of emergency. How do we create non-rivalrousness? This is a concept that I've really sort of naturalized from Daniel Schmachtenberger, who has really written and spoken about this eloquently. We need to create a framework, both with governments and corporations. I'm writing a book about industrial epidemics, industrial pandemics, and how they can be stopped, and how we absolutely need to stop them. But we can't blame a corporation that's just doing what governments have said it can do. We have to change the soup we're swimming in. And that's why I take an ecological approach to all of this, right? We both need to not spiritually bypass and also not blame ourselves for the entire world. And so, again, it's neither cooperation nor competition all the way down. It's always a mix. So how do we deal with all of this on a personal, individual level? We all will have different affordances, different semiotic scaffolding that give us opportunities for
Not the
bravery
African tank
and
in
courage.
Russia.
And I think that those opportunities, when we take them, that's our destiny. That's our dharma. These are the moments where we feel most alive, where we're
Yeah.
acting in concert. Hannah Arendt says, this actually is freedom. Anything else that you think of is freedom, your own private, being able to do whatever you want in your own private realm, that's not freedom. Freedom is acting in concert with your equals, with your fellow citizens, with your fellow. Anything else that you think of is freedom, your own private, being able to do whatever you want in your own private realm, that's not freedom. Freedom is acting in concert with your equals, with your fellow citizens, with your fellow humans of the world, with your interspecies allies. And so I really prefer to think of it as all connected. The ecodelic work, the work that we're doing to try to change consciousness and rationality. What does that mean? To change what science is for and what's it supposed to do in our current culture.
Damn,
How
that's pretty
to
cool.
sort of disentangle the instrumentalization of technoscience from actual scientific inquiry, where truth is the main
Alright, I'm
focus.
AFKing again. I'm gonna go
I see
get
this
some
as-
water. Alright.
All part of it. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Only we, in our own lives, will know those moments of kairos, stepping out of the chronos, of doing our daily tasks, where we're like, this is why I'm alive, this is my purpose, this is what I'm supposed to do, and acting and coming together. And it's such a hard thing for us to even think about, because it's so scary, because things have gotten so extreme in every way. You know, we feel so disempowered, so much learned helplessness, where we've forgotten how to communicate with people we disagree with. We've forgotten how to mend our shoes or do basic things that people all around the world know how to do because they have to. And so part of the comfort that we have has also made us weak. And I don't mean that in any sort of like, you know, toxic masculinity sort of way. I mean it in terms of an intellectual weakness, which engages from the world around us.
Talking about sort of that the metaphysics, the thinking behind it, the crisis of reason behind it, because I see sort of a tendency
Alright,
in
I'm
some
gonna AFK
writers
again.
and think.
Just gonna let the clock run up. Oh, where's my voice? Oh, there. I was like, what the hell? But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and open tabs. Damn it. My mic working? This thing is always doing weird shit, man. It's like quiet again. Hold on. Hello? Hello? Test? Clipping? No clipping? Okay, it's Good like that, I guess. Anyway, yeah, I was gonna open some tabs for my job. Well, for finding a job, not my job. Huh. Sweet, this is cool. Right away, I'm seeing some interesting stuff. How long we got? Oh no, they're gonna take the point. Anyway. um Cool. Global Earth Repair Foundation Festival. That's pretty crazy. Alright. Okay. What was I doing? Oh yeah, untitled spreadsheet. Alright, I can do another
Вызываю огонь артиллерии!
thingy.
Понял, подтверждаю огонь!
Alright, I'll get back to it now.
Отряд, огонь по всем целям! Есть, слушай!
Thinkers to sort of just equate everything we see with nature, and you've written about something. I mean, naive materialism in the sense that matter as small building blocks being fundamental in our universe is becoming sort of a minority position intellectually, right? To really uphold that, then you really shouldn't read quantum mechanics and you shouldn't read sort of what neuroscientists are telling us. You definitely shouldn't read your work as well. So that's sort of a minority position, but there are these other flavors of materialism or physicalism, I'd call them, that are still quite widespread. And I was fascinated by reading about one of them called object-oriented ontology that you write about and you critique. I was just curious how you see sort of how that plays into the dynamics we now see worldwide. Also thinking about stuff like AI, because if you have an ontology in metaphysics that tells you there is a difference between an animate and the inanimate world, that sort of also enables you to spend billions of dollars on developing AI that is disastrous on many levels, but to just say it's all nature and this is just, I'm just playing my role in evolution, right? So what is the battle of the stories, the battle of the metaphysical stories right now that you see playing out worldwide geopolitically?
Hot crispy
Wow, sorry, big
bacon.
question,
You're referring to my article in the journal Zygon, in which I critique object-oriented ontology and other forms of speculative realism on a biosemiotic basis. And I do this in part because there's a lot of ethical and logical flaws in it, which I enumerate, but
first, what is it? Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So object-oriented ontology is this notion that objects speak to us, whether it's a glass or a table or a cashew or a plant or a cloud, right? And this is
Fuck
a
off,
form
buddy.
of,
I think I got
would
it.
say truncated, like cut short, apophania. So apophania is seeing things, seeing life where there is none. And pareidolia is like where you see faces in the clouds.
Yep.
And so if you look at evolutionary biology and psychology, if you see a false positive, right, a face in the clouds or a face in the bushes where there isn't one, and your cortisol levels spike for a second, but nothing happens, and then they can go back down, it's not much of a risk to your existence. However, if you have a false negative where there's a face of a jaguar or a crocodile or a hunter, right? Or, as we say, our current discourse, a man or a bear, then if you don't see it, you're dead. So we are prone to hallucinate all the time into, a shadow moves and we move. However, in our current world, we take everything as a threat, whether it's a comment on Facebook or, as an existential threat. It becomes that sort of face in the bushes that we perceive to be real. And if there's too many of those all the time, our cortisol levels spike, and it actually becomes a degenerate response rather than an evolutionarily helpful one, right? It becomes evolutionary non-advantageous. And so object-oriented ontology says that objects speak to us, but it doesn't talk about who's to interpret them. It doesn't talk about the question of interpretation at all. It makes lists and assemblages. It's sort of like bad Deleuzian phenomenology. Let's assume for a moment that our dashboard is zero-sum. You want to open some channels over here, maybe some other channels over there.
Man, this game's good.
So you can't be open to everything all the time.
Yeah.
No being, no organism can. That's sort of the omniscient positing of God, or of oneness and wholeness, right? Where there is no opposition. And so how do we deal with these connections to the world around us? Well, object-oriented ontology tells us that some people have privileged access to the noumena, basically. And
these are the people that sort of build AIs?
So that's an interesting question. The relationship between object-oriented ontology and, you could say, tescrialism, which is this sort of long-termism idea that came out of the really, poorly understood notion of utilitarianism or effective altruism, which thinks that if we just increase the amount of
Damn
happiness in the most vague, bland, general terms, that the world's a better place.
Yeah.
Right? With no distinctions at all. Right? Because happiness is this thing.
Oh, I love this
First of all,
game.
nobody who is actually happy seeks for happiness. Nobody actually wants happiness. We want meaning, not happiness. So that's a non-starter to begin with. But the notion that the universe will be happier if we destroy the entire world, if we sacrifice all of humanity and the Earth, and we create a bunch of virtual bots in sufficient numbers that have sufficient levels of consciousness, that their happiness is greater than all the beings on Earth, and that's it, end of story. And then we win. And this fairy tale is actually a nightmare, because a lot of people actually believe in this, and they're trying to create the end of the world where we all sort of uphold our consciousness.
Yeah, this really taps into. Have you read Shoshana Zuboff's work, her sort of analysis of hyper-capitalism, what it's called?
Surveillance capital.
Surveillance capital, sorry, that's the word.
And what we have here, on the one hand, is we have these millenarian Christians who want to, create war in the Middle East. So then, basically using Israel as a pawn in their own scheme, so then they can ascend and create the apocalypse.
Okay.
And so you have them on the one hand, working hand in hand with these AI people in Silicon Valley who have equal delusions, but they're pretending to be atheists rather than religious. They're pretending to be utilitarianisms, where they're praying to this this god of their own making, right? This Moloch of silicon that they think they'll get AGI at.
Talk about the bad ways of relating. An hour and 5 minutes. I think that's a huge thing about how we're subject to frameworks that are like literally batshit crazy, but that's what has the money. So it's like, oh, yeah.
Which will never happen, because all life, according to biosemiotics, has a digital component and an analog component. You have digital codes and analog. They just want digital. They think that ones and zeros is enough, that you can get to that consciousness from ones and zeros. And biosemiotics is bollocks. There's absolutely no way that that's ever existed, and could not be, because you need an analog dimension to interpretation itself, because that's how meaning is made. So you might have a thing that does a simulation of increasingly well and almost impossible to distinguish, but like, who cares? Why all this effort to just deceive? Because you're not actually creating consciousness, you're not actually creating life, you're not actually creating something that's meaningful. You are creating more slaves. So then
This game is too loud.
Human labor, you can do away with human meaning, you can silence people. It's just more weapons, basically. And these are not the tools that we actually need in our tool belt, because, as I'll remind you, E.O. Wilson,
Let me run that back.
pretending to be utilitarianisms, where they're praying to this,
Ooh,
this
that's
god
a
of their
tank.
own making, right? This
Ooh, that's
Moloch
yep.
of silicone, that they think they'll get AGI out of, which will never happen, because all life, according to biosemiotics, has a digital component and an analog component. You have digital code, they just want digital. They think that ones and zeros is enough, that you can get to actual consciousness from ones and zeros. And biosemiotics is bollocks. There's absolutely no way that that's ever existed, and could not be, because you need an analog dimension to interpretation itself, because that's how meaning is made. So you might have a thing that does a simulation of increasingly well and almost impossible to distinguish.
Oops, that'll cut name up. That's not
who
helpful.
cares? Why all this effort to just deceive? Because you're not actually creating consciousness. You're not actually creating life. You're not actually creating something
These damn things.
that's
Okay.
meaningful. You are creating a servant. You are creating more slaves. So then you can do away with human labor. You can do away with human meaning. You can silence people. It's just more weapons, basically.
Ain't
And
no
these
way,
are not the tools that
bitch.
we actually need in our tool belt, because, as I'll remind you, E.O. Wilson famously said, we are living with Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. And it's
Dude,
the mismatch
that's
between
fucking
these
crazy.
that's driving all the problems.
1.06.
So I would say, nope, we need a grand moratorium on all technological
Dude.
development until we fix our institutions, and we deal with the fact that our unfelt, unmet emotions are driving this whole thing. We are being meat puppets because we're not actually taking account internally or externally, or in the other realms of who is sucking our blood. What creatures have we let become vampires if we're not aware of them, when they could be our allies?
We need to
Oops.
feel again.
Oh, you
That's
fucking
the only
dig.
way that we survive.
Okay.
Is through acknowledging that most of our so-called rationality, most of our so-called science and technology, and almost all of our governance is being driven by,
Oh,
at
shit.
this point, dysbiosis.
Oh man, we might be fucked.
In our world, in our existence, and the only way to access that is
Woo,
through healing.
close.
And in Asher Walden's work on the symbiotic ecology in the imaginal realms, right? He's talking about psychedelic experience, and we meet all these other creatures. And
Scared.
if we are not able to acknowledge this ecology, these invisible realms, and to make peace, to harmonize.
Dude, up in the tree?
our
That's
relations,
crazy.
we must meet our own fears. We must meet our own feeling and sense of inadequacy, which makes us strive for never having enough. Right? And never have
Ouija.
enough of pressure. And what we find when we get to a moment of sufficiency
There is a
is
tank down there.
sufficiency
Gosh
not
dang
through
it.
being Rambo, but through our network of relations, creating an ecology, a habitat, both through our family and friends, our community, but also being able to eat from our surroundings, having nowhere to get clean water, know where we can make our own electricity, know where we can have plants and develop generational projects. Of
Fuck,
food
we're
forests,
cooked. Oh, we're so cooked.
eco-villages, all of this.
Oh, we're not cooked.
That will allow us to relax this notion that we have to prepare for the apocalypse all the time, which is burdening every human being's consciousness, and actually all the other organisms too, because we're mowing down the Amazon.
No, you son of a bitch. Oh.
I just read Jean-Baptiste
Oh,
Foucault's book,
got him with the last
More and
round.
More, about energy.
Holy
symbiosis,
shit.
Where we have never gone through an energy transition.
Push.
We need more wood than ever, more coal than ever, more oil and gas. And so going to renewables is not going to solve the story. We need to reduce the amount of waste in our society. The invention of pollution needs to also have a cap where the end of pollution.
Oh.
I
Damn it.
want to zoom out with you, like
Oh, we have no
Seriously.
rallies. Oh, I have no
really
squad.
high metaphysical
This is
level.
bad, man.
Hearing you talk, and there's a lot of
No,
things
it's
that
over.
I think
It's
first of all,
over.
I
They
have
had
this
11
fascination
tickets
through
left.
reading your work, but also my own research into sort of biology, having interviewed Michael Levin, for instance, on how we can be inspired. When you talk about inhale and exhale, sort of, and you could also say sort of this boundary we have to somehow keep up. You know, evolution has taught us to, in my own world, to sort of keep my models going. My default mode network helps me to sit here down with you, have this conversation. At the same time, it hinders.
Okay. So this is super cool. We're going to wrap it up here, and we will be back at some point to finish it up. Thanks for checking it out. Bye.